Miriam Muscat Aleha Shalom, and let's dedicate the learning to her memory. Lilu Nishmasa. This Devar Torah for PARSHA Zveira, I'm calling the frog factor. Why am I calling it the frog factor? Well, let's just talk a little bit about the plague of Tzfardeya, which we're going to read about in this week's Parsha. Chazal give us a number of reasons as to why the plague of Tzfardeya was an appropriate affliction for the Egyptians. One reason that's brought in the Medrash is, you ever see that show Fear Factor? I don't know if it's still on television anymore. They used to, what they would do is they would take contestants who would have to do the most disgusting things in the world, and whoever could be more disgusting than the other would win the game show. Right? That's what passes for entertainment in today's world. Right? So you'd have to lie down on a bed and have worms crawl all over you, or you'd have to eat an eyeball of a cow or something like that. You know, really, really disgusting things. And this was part of the... do you know what I'm talking about, or is this all foreign to you? Okay, good. I hope it's not just an American thing. Canadians have seen this as Chazarai as well. I think I watched 5 minutes of one show. That was enough for a lifetime. One of the things that the Egyptians did to the Jews was that they would get some kind of sick pleasure by tormenting their Jewish slaves by having them do disgusting things. Here, go down into the snake pit and stay there for a few minutes. I want to see you squirm. Or here, lie down while I put worms all over your body or spiders all over you, and let's see how long you can last. And because this was some kind of sick entertainment that the Egyptians subjected their Hebrew slaves with, HaKadosh Baruch Hu punishes the Egyptians by making them have their own fear factor by being overrun with frogs. So that no matter where you lifted up the toilet seat, there were frogs croaking. You lifted up your bed covers, there were frogs all over the place. And that was their personal nightmare as a punishment. They would have the Jews capture bugs and insects for them. That's another reason that's brought down in the Medrash. They would also, because they subjected the Jews to completely disrupted sleep patterns, they would make them wake up in the middle of the night. They mamish couldn't sleep. They had no life. In the middle of the night, they'd be woken up to do some kind of menial task. And as a result, HaKadosh Baruch Hu subjects them with Tzfardeya in order to, that the croaking of the frogs would wake them up and wouldn't allow them to sleep. Another reason that's brought down in the Medrash is that the women, when they would give birth, the Jewish women, because they couldn't reveal to the Egyptians that they were giving birth because they were scared that their child would be taken away and killed, they couldn't scream when they were in labor. So can you imagine, not only is it painful when you're in labor having a child, I don't know from personal experience, but I've seen my wife, right? But not to be able to scream because out of a fear that your child will be killed only adds to that tremendous pain of giving birth to a child. And as the punishment, Mida Keneged Mida, Kodesh Baruch Hu subjects them to all of the screaming that had been suppressed by the Jewish women. So a number of different reasons that are brought by Chazal as to why. I wanted to share with you a very interesting machlokas that is discussed in the Gemara, a dispute between two great sages, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. The introduction to this Gemara is a statement by the Amora, by the sage of the Talmud, Rabbi Elazar, and it's Gemara in Maseches Sanhedrin Daf Samach Zayin Amud Beis, as you can see in your handout, and it's going on the pasuk where the Torah says Vatal Hatzfardeya, Vatichas Eretz Mitzrayim, that the frog emerged from the Nile and it completely covered the entire land of Egypt. What immediately jumps out at you, no pun intended, what immediately jumps out at you in the pasuk is that the word Tzfardeya is in the singular in this pasuk. So the question is, we should say Vaya'alu or Hatzfardeim, that the frogs came out of the Nile. Why the frog? So Rabbi Elazar says Tzfardeya echat haita, that it was one frog. Hishritza umala'a chol eretz Mitzrayim, and it swarmed and spread out to the entire land of Egypt. Now, what does it mean it swarmed? The Medrash Tanchuma, the Warsaw edition of the Medrash Tanchuma, explains really sort of what is going on. Rabbi Akiva in the Tanchuma says, Sephardeya echas haisa, there was one frog, v'hayu hamitzrim makinota umatezes sephardiim harbe. And the Egyptians saw this huge frog come out of the Nile. What a frightening scene this is. And everyone is horrified by this frog has got to be the size of a house. And all the Egyptians come by and take their big sticks and try to whack it. And as they're whacking this frog, it multiplies. It splits into 2. Then it splits into 4. Then it splits like, mitosis. In other words, it's cell division. The frog divides more and more and more and more and more until there are thousands or hundreds of thousands of frogs swarming all over Egypt. That's what is described in the Medrash, to sort of explain what is meant by when it says that one frog came out and it swarmed throughout the land. Let's go back to the Gemara. The Gemara says Kitanai. This is a machlokas tanoim. Rabbi Akiva Omer Tzefardeya Echat Haita, that there was one frog, says Rabbi Akiva, Umala'achal Eretz Mitzrayim, and it swarmed throughout Egypt, like Rabbi Akiva says in the Midrash Tanchuma, like that I just quoted for you. Amar lo Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who's a colleague of Rabbi Akiva, says to him in a very surprising way, he says, Akiva malacha etzel haggadah, klei midbarosecha v'lech etzel negoim ve'ohalos, or kalei midibrotecha. He says to him, Akiva, what are you doing with homily? What are you doing with sermonic biblical interpretation? That's not your forte. That's not your field of expertise. Stop talking, kalei midibrotecha. Stop interpretations, and talk about the halachas of the laws of Tumah and the laws of Tsaras. That's what you're an expert in, Akiva. Keep your nose out of parts of Torah interpretation where you have no business going. That's surprising, isn't that? I mean, for rabbis to speak in that way. And so after giving him this chastisement, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah then says, Sephardeya echas haisa, there was really one frog that came out of the Nile. That explains why it says in the singular, Vatal ha-sephardeya. But then where did all the other frogs come from? Sharaka lahem v'hem ba'u. And it whistled, or it croaked, in this context. The frog said a big ribbit. Mm-hmm. And then all of the other frogs came from all over the country. And that's how the swarm of the Sephardeya took place. So let's just recap this machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Akiva says there was one frog which split off through some kind of miraculous division. According to the Tanchuma, it's because they hit it, and every time they hit it, it split into 2. And that's how the swarm was, and they swarmed all over Egypt. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, you don't know what you're talking about. Stop it already. Go somewhere else. Find your area of expertise. Stop your homiletic interpretations. They're incorrect. But rather, the real interpretation is the frog croaked and all the other frogs came running. Or came hopping. Now, what's bothersome is that why is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah so annoyed with Rabbi Akiva? And really what difference does it make? Whether it was one frog that swarmed into many, or one frog that whistled or croaked and all the other frogs came a-coming. Does it really make a difference? And why is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah so annoyed, so irritated with Rabbi Akiva for offering his interpretation? Okay, so I mean, even if he is mistaken, is that a reason to get so annoyed with him? What does the word Sephardeya mean? Sephardeya is an unusual word. It's you never find in the Hebrew language a word that is more than 4 letters as its root. And if you count the letters of the essential letters of Sephardeya, I count 5. So that immediately tells you that we're not dealing with a normative Hebrew word. So according to the Yalkut and according to other midrashim, the word Sephardeya is a contraction of 2 words. Sipor De'ah, a bird of knowledge. And what that really means, tzipor de'ah, is the reason why is a frog called a bird, do you think? Simply? Because it jumps. It jumps, it hops through the air. So it has that bird-like feature of flying or leaping through the air. And de'ah, because it has some kind of instinctive knowledge to associate with its fellow frogs. And as a matter of fact, the Medrash is quite complimentary of the frogs. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that because the frogs willingly threw themselves into the furnace to bake themselves together with the bread of the Egyptians to cause them more suffering, Hashem gives a special schar to the frogs of the world. What does the word sipor mean? The word sipor, of course, we know means a bird, but if you look in the Radak's Sefer HaSharashim, which is a very important work by Rav David Kimchi, one of the Rishonim, with very famous Nach commentary, but he also wrote something called the Sefer HaSharashim, which is where he takes every single shoresh of the Hebrew language and explains its etymology, explains what it means. Tzadi Peiresh, according to one opinion in the Radak, is a creature that circles, that goes around and circles and comes in, circles inwards, creates a what's the word I'm looking for? A convergence. That's what I'm looking for. So therefore, if you look at the Radak in source number 4, he says that some explain that the word sipor is from the word inyan sivuv, that it comes in its circles, because birds tend to do that, especially birds of prey. They tend to circle around their prey, like a vulture, if you can imagine that for just a moment. And therefore, when you have in a verse in Sefer Yeshaya, which uses the tzadi peirei shorish, v'lit sfirat tifara, the word sefira comes from the word sipor. But what does it mean? It's referring to, he says, hamitznefet shesovavin al harosh. It refers to a turban which encompasses the head in a circular fashion, which you tie around the head. That's the idea of why a turban is called a sefira, because it encompasses your head like a bird circling around its prey. And so it would seem that the word sephardeia, which is really what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is saying, is that the frog is a creature that converges, not a creature that swarms outward. So when the Torah says, Vatal ha-sephardeia vatechas et kol eretz Mitzrayim, that the Sephardeia emerged and covered the land of Egypt, it has to have been a convergence kind of behavior instead of a dispersion, a convergence instead of a dispersion. And that's what annoys Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah so much, but I think it's more than that. It's not just the etymology of the word Sephardeia. Because there's another very important lesson in what the Sephardeia is all about. The Torah says, V'cha'asher ya'anu oso kein yirbeh v'chein yifrotz, that the more that the Egyptians tormented the Jewish people, the more that the Jewish people multiplied and spread throughout the land. And ultimately, there are two ways to understand the great multiplication and growth of the Jewish people. One is a dispersion of the Jewish people, and one is a growth that multiplies and gets stronger but never disperses. And the lesson of the Sephardeia for both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is to describe the existence and the growth of the Jewish people. That from one small little family that Yaakov Avinu comes down with to Egypt, comes an entire swarm of Jews. And that happens, for Rabbi Akiva, it happens through whacking them and hitting them. V'chasher ya'anu oso kein yirbeh v'chein yifrotz. That the more they are hit, the more they are afflicted, the more that they multiply and swarm. And that's the metaphor for the Jewish people. And that's the lesson for the Egyptians. You foolish Egyptians, you thought you would subjugate us, you thought you would dominate us. The more you try to afflict us, the more we grow, the stronger that we become, the more voluminous as a people we become. But for Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that's not an appropriate depiction of what happened to the Jewish people, because if that were the proper depiction, then we would expect a disparate, discombobulated, decentralized nation of Jews who would not be able to submit themselves to a central authority figure. And therefore, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, no. A frog is a creature who, when he hears the croak, when he hears the voice of one of his fellow frogs, he comes a-running, and he converges, and he unites, and he becomes one with his fellow frogs. And that's the message that had to be conveyed to the Egyptian people. The nature of Klal Yisrael is such that we may multiply and grow and spread out and go throughout the diaspora and all the four corners of the world. But when that great voice is ready to be sounded, we'll all be ready to converge and come back and to submit ourselves to that great voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whether it's atop Har Sinai or emanating from Yerushalayim, from the Beis HaMikdash, because that's the nature of the Jewish people. So Rabbi Akiva, you're better off in your leave your homiletic interpretations to those who understand the deeper meaning of what Sephardeia represents, because the message for Klal Yisrael is so much deeper. It's not about dispersion, it's about convergence of Klal Yisrael. And we should be able to hear that croaking. Have a wonderful day.